It was a crisp afternoon in early autumn, and the city buzzed with activity. The streets were filled with pedestrians, their hurried steps echoing off the buildings as traffic flowed steadily. Olivia Grant, the president of the Human Rights Council, walked down Fifth Avenue after a long day at work. Dressed in a worn coat and simple black jeans, she was one of the most influential people in the city, but she preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Her leather handbag, old but sturdy, was a reminder of years spent in service to others. As Olivia walked, her thoughts were focused on the ongoing efforts to tackle inequality and racial injustice in the city. But as she passed a busy intersection, her attention was drawn to a gathering crowd. People were murmuring, standing in a loose circle. Olivia's curiosity piqued, and she moved closer. At the center of the commotion, a middle-aged man, wearing a shabby coat and looking visibly flustered, was bowing and apologizing profusely to a police officer. The man had accidentally bumped into the officer while navigating through the crowd. Despite his genuine apology, the officer seemed more angry than understanding. "Do you know what you just did?" the officer barked, his voice filled with anger. "You think you can just walk into me and get away with it?" "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident," the man stammered, clearly intimidated. "Accident?" the officer sneered. "You think that's an excuse?" The officer, whose name was James Grayson, had always believed his badge gave him power. He stood tall with his chest puffed out and hands on his hips, looking down at the man as if he were beneath him. Olivia could sense that the situation was getting out of hand. The crowd around them had grown, but no one seemed willing to step in. Some people were filming, but most just watched silently, hesitant to get involved. Unable to stand by any longer, Olivia stepped forward. She was aware of the tension in the air, but remained calm, her voice steady and polite as she addressed the officer. "Excuse me, officer," she said. "I don't think this is necessary." The man apologized, and it's just a minor mistake. There's no need to escalate it like this. Officer Grayson turned toward Olivia, sizing her up with a glance. His eyes narrowed as he saw a woman who appeared unassuming, black, dressed in simple clothes, not a person he thought could challenge him. "Who do you think you are?" Grayson scoffed. "This is police business, lady. People like you should mind your own business." Olivia didn't flinch at his harsh words. She had heard worse, seen worse. "I'm not trying to interfere, but as a police officer, your job is to treat people fairly. This is just a misunderstanding." Grayson's face twisted with contempt. He wasn't used to being questioned by anyone, let alone a black woman in plain clothes. His anger flared. "Fairness? What would someone like you know about fairness?" he mocked, his voice rising. "Why don't you just stay out of it?" Olivia stayed calm. "I'm not lecturing you, officer," she said, her voice steady, "but this is not how someone in your position should act. You're supposed to protect and serve, not insult people over a simple mistake." The officer's face turned red with rage, his pride wounded by her calm demeanor. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he hissed. "If you don't back off, I'll have you arrested for interfering with an officer in the line of duty." Olivia didn't step back. She had faced much worse in her life, and this wouldn't be the moment she backed down. She was determined to do what was right. "Go ahead," she said, her voice firm. "If you want to escalate it, then do it. But I won't let you abuse your power." As Olivia spoke, she pulled out her phone and began dialing. Officer Grayson scoffed at her, assuming she was bluffing, but he had no idea just how wrong he was. Olivia pressed her phone to her ear, her expression calm as she waited for the mayor's office to pick up. She had seen enough. The officer's behavior was beyond unreasonable, and she wasn't about to let it slide. The crowd had grown restless, sensing that something important was about to unfold, but no one dared to intervene. Officer Grayson, still standing with his hands on his hips, watched Olivia closely. He was confident she was just trying to intimidate him, but his smug grin faltered slightly when she didn't back down. He scoffed, muttering under his breath, but kept his posture intact. "You think the mayor's going to help you?" he sneered. "Go ahead, make your call, but it won't do you any good." Olivia didn't respond. Instead, she simply listened to the ringing of the phone, her eyes steady and unflinching, as Grayson continued to bark insults at her. She had been through this before. People trying to intimidate her because of her race, her gender, or the simple fact that she stood up for what was right. But she wasn't afraid of any of it. She wasn't afraid of Grayson, and she wasn't afraid to stand alone if it meant sending a message. After a brief pause, Olivia's call was answered. "This is Olivia Grant. I need to speak to Mayor Carter immediately," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. Grayson's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected her to be so calm, so composed, and hearing her speak with such confidence, the kind of confidence that only came from someone who truly held power, started to unsettle him. "Who do you think you're talking to?" Grayson spat, still standing tall, his chest puffed out with arrogant defiance. "I'm a cop, and you're just a woman walking down the street. You think a phone call is going to stop me?" Olivia didn't flinch. She calmly ended the call and tucked the phone back into her pocket. "You'll see," she said quietly. "The mayor will be here shortly, and when he arrives, I hope you'll still feel as confident as you do now." Grayson let out a short laugh, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The mayor? Right. What, does she know the mayor? This is a joke." Olivia's expression remained neutral. She didn't respond to his taunts. Instead, she stepped back, letting the officer's words hang in the air. The crowd, sensing the tension rising, had grown silent, almost as if they were waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Olivia could feel the energy of the crowd shift as the air thickened with anticipation. Grayson, growing more agitated by the second, continued to throw verbal jabs in her direction. But Olivia remained steadfast, her focus never wavering. Then the sound of a car pulling up broke the tension. A sleek black vehicle stopped near the crowd, and the doors swung open. From the vehicle stepped Mayor Marcus Carter, flanked by a group of police chiefs and aides. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as they recognized the most powerful man in the city. The mayor, a tall man in his early 50s, with sharp features and an air of authority, walked toward the scene with purpose. His eyes were locked on Grayson, and as soon as he reached the officer, he spoke in a voice that commanded respect. "Put that gun down, Officer Grayson," Mayor Carter said, his tone cold and filled with authority. Grayson, still holding his ground, turned to the mayor, his earlier bravado faltering as he realized who had arrived. The color drained from his face when he saw Olivia standing there. The pieces clicked together, and his smugness quickly turned to panic. I didn't know," Grayson stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. He had just threatened the president of the Human Rights Council, and now the mayor himself was here. The mayor's voice was sharp as he continued. "You didn't know? Well, now you do. You just pulled a gun on the president of the Human Rights Council. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The crowd, which had been silent up until now, gasped in disbelief. Many of them had been filming the scene, and they watched in stunned silence as the gravity of the situation sank in. Grayson's face flushed with embarrassment, his earlier confidence crumbling. He lowered his gun, his hands trembling as the mayor stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. Olivia took a slow, deliberate breath, her calm demeanor unwavering. She looked at Grayson, her voice steady but laced with quiet authority. "Your behavior is unacceptable, officer. I suggest you reflect on it carefully." As the mayor continued to address Grayson, Olivia could feel the weight of the moment settling in. It was a pivotal turning point, not just for her, but for everyone witnessing this exchange. She knew that the fight for justice wasn't always easy, but it was moments like this that made her believe real change was possible. The tension in the air was thick as Officer Grayson lowered his gun, his hand trembling with humiliation. The crowd had gone silent, many of them still filming, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Mayor Marcus Carter stood next to Olivia, his presence commanding, yet his gaze was locked onto Officer Grayson with sharp intensity. Grayson looked from Olivia to the mayor, his face pale and his posture slumped. For a moment he seemed lost, as if unsure of how to navigate the sudden shift in power. He had underestimated Olivia, assuming she was just another person who didn't understand the authority he wielded. But now, with the mayor of the city standing just feet away, reality had set in. Mayor Carter's voice rang out, strong and full of authority. "Officer Grayson, do you know who you just threatened?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Grayson swallowed hard, his voice shaky. I didn't know. I thought she was just some random person. I didn't realize. You didn't realize? Mayor Carter interrupted, his voice sharp as a knife. You pulled your gun on a woman who is not only a respected member of this community, but also the president of the Human Rights Council. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? The officer stood frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment and regret. It was a far cry from the confident, arrogant officer who had threatened Olivia just moments before. He was now facing the consequences of his rash actions, and the weight of his mistake was starting to sink in. Olivia, however, remained composed. She knew all too well how people like Grayson viewed individuals in positions of power, especially women and people of color. But she also knew that real change required standing up in these moments, no matter the personal cost. Turning to face the crowd, Mayor Carter addressed them in a firm, steady voice. This is not how we conduct ourselves in this city. No one, no matter who they are, should ever be subjected to this kind of treatment, especially by someone sworn to protect and serve. As the mayor spoke, Grayson's posture shrank further. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of their judgment pressing down. His arrogance, once so overpowering, had crumbled in the face of real accountability. The mayor's words were a reminder that power, when abused, always comes at a price. Olivia glanced at the crowd, seeing the murmurs ripple through the group. Some were nodding in agreement, while others were still processing what had just unfolded. But one thing was clear. This was a moment that would be remembered, one that would spark change in the city. The mayor turned back to Grayson, his voice growing colder. I've had enough of this. You're suspended from duty, effective immediately. You will be investigated, and rest assured, there will be consequences for your actions. Grayson's mouth went dry as he stood there, unable to speak. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his mistake now fully sinking in. The crowd remained silent, watching as the officer's once proud demeanor faded entirely. Olivia, standing beside the mayor, felt a quiet sense of relief. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but the outcome gave her hope. She had done what was right, and the city's leadership had backed her up. This wasn't just about a single incident. It was a reminder that when power was abused, it was not enough to turn a blind eye. I want to thank you, Mayor Carter, for your swift intervention, Olivia said, her voice calm but firm. It's important to remember that justice must be upheld by everyone, especially those in positions of authority. The mayor nodded, his expression filled with respect for Olivia. We're just getting started. This will not be overlooked, Olivia. I promise you that. As Officer Grayson was escorted away by two other officers, the crowd began to disperse, some still murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Olivia stood still, watching as the scene unfolded. She knew this was only one battle in a much larger war, but today she had taken a step toward justice, and she would not stop. The incident quickly became the talk of the city. News outlets picked up the story, and social media exploded with footage of Officer Grayson's actions. The video, which had been recorded by several bystanders, spread rapidly. People were outraged by the officer's behavior, but what truly sparked the most intense reaction was the revelation that Olivia Grant, the president of the Human Rights Council, had been the one he had threatened. As the days passed, the story continued to dominate headlines. The video, which showed Grayson berating the middle-aged man and later pointing a gun at Olivia, was shared thousands of times. The footage captured Grayson's arrogance and blatant disrespect for the people he was meant to serve. It was a powerful visual, a stark reminder of the systemic issues that plagued the police force. Olivia's phone rang constantly. She received messages of support from people across the city, as well as requests for interviews from national news outlets. But amidst the praise, there were also those who questioned her actions, asking if she had gone too far in confronting a police officer. Some even criticized her for causing a scene, suggesting that she should have just walked away. But Olivia remained focused. She knew this wasn't about her. It was about standing up against injustice, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult the confrontation. She had faced adversity before, but this was different. This time, the eyes of the city and the nation were on her. The public outcry was swift, and it didn't take long before the city's leadership responded. Mayor Carter, whose intervention had diffused the situation, called for a formal investigation into Officer Grayson's actions. The police department, which had been under increasing scrutiny for its handling of racial issues, could no longer ignore the growing demand for accountability. By the end of the week, Officer Grayson had been suspended from duty, pending an internal investigation. The police department released a statement condemning his actions, promising a full review of the incident. Meanwhile, human rights organizations, community leaders, and activists began calling for greater reforms within the department. At a meeting with the mayor and his staff, Olivia made it clear that she wasn't interested in just seeing Grayson punished. "This isn't just about one officer's actions," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to persist unchecked. We need a full-scale review of how the police force operates from top to bottom. It's time for real change." The mayor listened carefully, his face thoughtful. "I agree," he said. "This incident is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to address the systemic racism within our police force, and we need to do it now." Over the next few days, Olivia worked closely with the mayor's office, drafting a proposal for police reform. It included mandatory anti-racism training for all officers, a comprehensive review of past cases of police misconduct, and increased transparency in how complaints were handled. Olivia also pushed for greater community involvement in the decision-making process, believing that the best way to rebuild trust between the police and the public was to ensure that both sides had a seat at the table. The investigation into Grayson's actions continued behind closed doors, but the public pressure was undeniable. With each passing day, the calls for accountability grew louder, and as the story spread beyond the city's borders, it became clear that what had started as a single confrontation on a city street was now part of a much larger conversation about police conduct, power, and the need for reform. As the week came to a close, Olivia felt a sense of resolve settle over her. This battle wasn't over yet, but it was a step in the right direction. She knew that change would take time, but she also knew that if the community continued to stand together, it was possible. The fight for justice was far from finished, but Olivia was ready to keep pushing forward. Days passed, and the story of Officer Grayson's conduct continued to reverberate throughout the city. The video, shared widely, sparked both outrage and calls for justice. While some were sympathetic to Grayson's position, the overwhelming majority saw the footage as clear evidence of the abuse of power that many had long suspected within the police force. The more people saw, the more they understood that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of discrimination and mistreatment that had plagued the city's law enforcement for years. Olivia was asked to speak at several public forums and interviews, where she reiterated her call for systemic change. Her message was clear: it was not enough to punish one officer. Real change would require addressing the entire structure of the police department, tackling the deep-rooted biases and injustices that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. As the investigation into Officer Grayson's actions progressed, it became evident that his behavior was not an isolated case. Several past incidents of inappropriate conduct were reviewed, and it was clear that Grayson's disregard for the rights of citizens was part of a broader issue within the department. He had been reprimanded before for his aggressive behavior, but his actions had never been seriously addressed. Grayson was summoned to appear before the courts. The trial began amidst widespread media coverage, with reporters and activists filling the courtroom. The prosecution laid out its case, presenting the video evidence and testimony from Olivia and other witnesses. Olivia, calm and composed, spoke directly about the incident, how Grayson had insulted and threatened her, and how his actions had violated the public trust. The defense attempted to downplay the severity of the situation, but there was no hiding the truth. In the end, the judge delivered a verdict that shocked many, but to those who had been following the case, it was justice in action. Officer Grayson was found guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and racial discrimination. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison without parole and permanently barred from serving in law enforcement. The courtroom erupted into applause from those who had been following the case, a collective moment of relief that the justice system had taken a stand against corruption. Though the sentence was a victory, Olivia knew that the real work was only just beginning. She was invited to speak on national television about the case, and she used the opportunity to advocate for greater police reform, not just in her city, but across the nation. Justice is not just about punishing the wrongdoers, she said during the interview. It's about ensuring that no one else is subjected to the same treatment. It's about making sure that our systems are fair, equitable, and just for everyone, no matter their background or the color of their skin. In the months that followed, the city began to see real changes. New training programs were implemented for all officers, focusing on racial sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and ethical behavior. Community outreach initiatives were launched to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the residents they served. Olivia continued to work tirelessly, partnering with the mayor and local activists to ensure that these changes weren't just temporary fixes, but part of a lasting transformation. As the year came to a close, the city had made significant strides in creating a more just and fair environment. While Olivia knew that the fight for equality was far from over, she was proud of the progress they had made. The battle against injustice was long and ongoing, but with each victory, no matter how small, she was reminded of why she fought. Olivia smiled to herself as she watched the city begin to change, knowing that the courage of a single person standing up in the face of injustice had sparked a movement that would carry on for generations to come.